Good morning. It is July 8th, and we've started to get into the real heat of the battle. Some pretty extreme weather events this week around the state causing problems. And we've got kind of a range of issues that are starting to pop up as we see increased heat, humidity, and problems associated with it. So online today, we've got Dr. Dominic Petrella and we've got Dr. Dave Gardner, and we may or may not have one or two joining us. The turf camp is ongoing in Columbus with Palm Shrat, so that's kind of consuming a lot of time. But without further ado, Dr. Gardner, take away the weed update.
All right, good morning, everybody. So I don't know if I'm actually allowed to use this image. I've cited where I got it from off of the internet. This is the National Weather Service. And if you go to this particular link here, what this is it's a graphic that shows the precipitation year to date for Columbus, the Port Columbus Airport. But this was for the year 2021. And notice on this graph that last year we were in a deficit, pretty much for the entire year to this point, which was unusual because for most of the years this decade, we've been considerably above normal, kind of like this year, okay? We actually have been running a surplus for rainfall, but it came at really inopportune times. I don't know if that's a word or not, maybe it's inopportune. But anyway, you see that for most of the month of June, this was flatlined because we didn't get any rain at all. Until this week, where at the Port Columbus Airport, at least, they recorded their fourth highest daily total ever. Like 3.7 inches, I believe, was the total. Unfortunately, I think I talked last week, and maybe it'll be mentioned again, that the infiltration capacity of most of our soils does not support getting 3.7 inches of rain in one day, which is why there were a lot of aerial and flash flood warnings. But, we've been having a problem with our grass looking kind of like this. And one of the things that Ed's going to talk about in a little bit is that we've also had problems with the grass looking like this too. Because when you have dry weather, that can exacerbate, like injury due to traffic and things like that. But one thing that has been doing really, really well during this dry spell is bird's foot trefoil, and another one is white clover. Beautiful bird's foot trefoil and white clover all over the place. Because both of those plant species have a competitive advantage versus our cool season grasses in not only wetter soils, but also drier soils. So, at the start of the year, it was too wet, and recently it's been too dry. And in both of those instances, these two weeds have had a competitive advantage over the grass. And since this is the time of the year where you see maximum bloom activity on those, dandelions more like April, early May, the clovers are more like this time of the year. They've been quite noticeable. Now, what to do about that? Well, there are some herbicides that are better for the control of clovers. These are the three: MCPP, clopyralid, if you're on a golf course. Clopyralid used to be registered for all turf uses and was restricted to golf course use back in 2001, I believe it was. And fluroxapyr is now what you use for non-golf course uses. The one thing that I would offer is that you'll get better long-term control of that clover or bird's foot trefoil if you make the application this fall. Those are both perennial plants, and we know that those weeds tend to be better controlled with fall applications. Now, if it's for aesthetic purposes and you have a client that's complaining to you, then that's kind of a problem. You have to treat it sooner rather than later. The thing is, well, one, you want to make sure that the grass isn't too dry, that you're going to leave tire tracks with your application equipment. More on that in a minute from Ed. But the other thing is that, sometimes our herbicides don't work so well. Like if you spray in the middle of the day, you spray, the treated turf is dry 20 minutes later. That means that you had 20 minutes to get that herbicide into that plant, which means that you're probably not going to get the control that you were hoping for. So in these areas, try to make those applications on turf that is sufficiently hydrated, number one, and number two, in the early morning or on days that the high temperature is going to be cooler. Crabgrass, we are just about to that window where crabgrass is beginning to rapidly tiller and increase in coverage and become quite noticeable in lawns. And we'll even start to see some seed heads coming up. And that means that one of our mainstay herbicides, quinclorac, for the control of crabgrass is going to start to become more effective. So on this graphic, what I'm trying to show is the cautionary tale that when you use quinclorac on leaf stage crabgrass, it works really well. That's the yellow line here. So 80 to 100% control for 60 days after application. The problem is that sometimes new crabgrass seedlings come in when you make those leaf stage applications in May because the crabgrass is still germinating. But when you try to treat when crabgrass is just starting to tiller, so basically during the month of June, this data with this orange line here, I can repeat this every year at the OTF Center. There's just something about this particular active is a little bit less effective when crabgrass is actively growing, and then it becomes more effective again after the crabgrass has reached, like 5 to 7 tiller and is beginning to put out seed heads. And so, quinclorac works quite well during the month of July, which is when, we usually recommend its use, okay? Another product that I recommend for crabgrass control is topramazone, marketed primarily in the form of Pylex, but there are formulations available for homeowners and other branded products with topramazone in them. And so, you see this area here on the left is the untreated control versus the square of cleaned out turf on the right is Pylex. The use rate can be kind of a challenge for, if you're trying to do small areas because it's 1.5 fluid ounces per acre, but a highly effective product. Honestly, what I tend to recommend though is if you take a half a rate of Pylex and a half a rate of quinclorac, so half rate topramazone, half rate of quinclorac, that tends to give really good control. And a side benefit of that is that the quinclorac will mute some of the bleaching effect of the topramazone because, again, the goal is to make the crabgrass less visible, not more visible. And sometimes if you just spray straight topramazone, the whitening effect can make the crabgrass, quite noticeable until the herbicide has had a chance to completely control the plant. One last thing that I want to mention that should be on your radar. So crabgrass control you should be thinking about during the month of July. Something else is to start mapping out areas where you've got weeds that cannot be controlled selectively. So orchard grass, quack grass, undesirable cool season grasses like rough bluegrass. And you should be planning on making those applications of a non-selective herbicide to give you enough time so that you're able to reestablish in that August 15th to September 1st window. But I'll talk more about that as the dates approach. Ed, that's my update for this week.
Thanks, Dave. One question following up from that conversation that we were kind of having offline last night, Dave. We talked about the idea of Roundup and mesotrione on bare dirt versus trying to kill out a lawn. Any thoughts on kind of trying to hold back weeds if you're looking to still seed into bare dirt maybe in 4 or 5 weeks time?
In 4 to 5 weeks time, I was thinking more about that. I think my concern with using the mesotrione, you'd want to check the label. It's a weird herbicide in that its pre-emerge residual activity is really short on a full stand of turf grass. It breaks down too quickly due to the microbial populations associated with the thatch. But on bare soil, it's a really effective pre-emergence herbicide that can last for a long time. That said, it doesn't seem to have any pre-emergence activity really per se on Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass, and the fescues, are desired grasses. So, but I think still, you'd want to, if you were going to do that, maybe make that application now, and then, target it so that, the second application was maybe in 3 weeks, and then the third application was on the day that you were going to put the seed down in August. And then the glyphosate, since that doesn't have any residual soil activity, you're more free to use that, anytime that you want prior to seeding, or I think the label says 7 to 14 days out. But again, the whole idea is to make sure that there isn't enough residual herbicide in the soil that it's going to interfere with seed germination. So normally we try to target the mesotrione so that, one application is done at least 3 weeks prior to seeding. And then, for whatever reason, you can do it on the day of seeding. But times immediately before and immediately after, we tend to try to shy away from. That was word salad. I'm sorry about that answer.
Sorry, you weren't expecting the question. Dr. Petrella.
All right. So along the lines Dave was talking about, the amount of rain we got and drought this summer. Up in Worcester, Northeast Ohio, we've been running pretty big deficits. We've gotten very little rainfall. When we've gotten rainfall, it's come in big dumps that are essentially useless. So this is a project that we have been working with a company called Meter Group. Meter Group was formerly called Decagon. They make soil moisture sensors and other water type sensors. They used to make them mostly for researchers, and now they're transitioning more to the consumer market. And they're starting to look at their weather stations and their sensors for lawn care. So we have this little project to compare irrigation using different methods, okay? So the first one up in the left-hand corner, we irrigate first based on a calendar. So for this, we apply a 1/2 inch of irrigation every Monday, no matter what. And we apply that 1/2 inch per week, once per week, because we want to irrigate deep and infrequently, okay? That deep and infrequent irrigation allows water to get further down in the root zone, that allows those roots to grow deeper towards where the water is at. If we are watering this calendar based every 2 days, and let's say we are only watering 1/10 to 2/10 of an inch, that water would stay really near the top of the soil surface, and we get more evaporation, and we wouldn't get deeper rooting. So we really targeted that calendar approach for deep and infrequent irrigation, but I also water back based on field. So I'll take a soil probe out and see how dry it is. And if it's dry, I'll put another 1/2 inch of water. The second one, we water back based on evapotranspiration. So evapotranspiration is the water loss by evaporation from the soil and transpiration through the plant. And we can use that data, which is calculated from a weather station, to water back. Okay, so let's say the weather dictates that we're going to lose obviously 1/2 inch is a lot. We're going to lose 2/10 of an inch of water in one day. If we're going to water back by 100% ET, we'd water back 2/10 of an inch the next day. Or if we're going to water back 50% ET, we'd water back 1/10 of an inch. Okay, so ET is mostly based on the weather. Okay, so hot, dry days, you're going to have high ET. Hot, humid days, ET is going to be lower. So for this ET replacement, we might not water back that 1/2 inch per week. We might water back only 1/10 of an inch or 2/10 of an inch. So this ET replacement, we might not be watering deep and infrequently. These next two plots, we water back based on in-ground soil moisture sensors. So we water back based on how much water is actually in the soil. This one on the right, we use volumetric water content. Those that use TDR sensors, that's what we're using. And I'm only watering back when the soil moisture gets at 10% for 2 days in a row. Okay. The bottom then, we're using and watering back based on water potential. So water potential is a little bit more accurate way to determine how much water is in the soil. And for this treatment, we're only watering back at 1,500 or minus 1,500 kilopascals, okay, that's pretty dang dry. You pull out a soil plug, you're going to basically see dust. Okay, so I've been watering these treatments since June 1st, and I'll show you how they've kind of moved since here June 13th, looking pretty green. Here's June 27th, just a couple weeks ago or a week ago, where things were starting to dry out. So you can see that our feeler calendar plots, they're still pretty green. Our plots being irrigated with data from the soil are also pretty green. And the ET plot was struggling a little bit. Again, for the ET treatment, we're not putting back water based on what's in the soil. Therefore, we might not be as accurate, okay? So you can say this ET treatment, based on the weather, we actually weren't putting back enough to recharge the soil, okay? July 5th, just this other day, things are starting to fry a lot, okay? So you can see these areas in here that weren't receiving any irrigation in between our two plots, they are fried. Watering back at least 1/2 inch per week, we're able to keep the bluegrass alive in the field treatment. In the ET replacement treatment, again, it's struggling a little bit. Just going back, watering back based on ET for this specific turf plot wasn't enough to keep it healthy. But using the soil moisture sensor and the water potential sensors, we were able to irrigate back to the amount that was essentially needed to keep the plants healthy. So we can go ahead and look at, well, how much water was used for these each individual treatments, okay? Because we want to balance the amount of water that's used versus healthy turf, okay? So for the field or calendar treatment up until this week, I put 3.5 inches of water, which was 157.5 gallons across this plot. This plot is 72 square feet, okay? So I back calculated that. So for 1,000 square feet, for this plot, we would have put 2,180 gallons of water to keep it to this decently dark green color, okay? For the ET treatment, we've only put out 1.5 inches, okay? 67.5 gallons. But for this specific little area, it was still a little bit dry, okay? So that 1.5 inches wasn't really enough to keep it healthy and green. It wasn't too bad, but some people might not like it. Then we can look at these two sensor-based treatments. It so happens that the water content up in the top right-hand corner, I've only put in 1/2 inch of irrigation, 22 gallons, and it's one of the best plots in the entire study. So this plot, when I look at the data, I can say it doesn't need water. So if we put water based on a calendar treatment, we'd be overwatering that plot. Okay, so we use data to make judgment. And down at the bottom right, the same thing with the water potential treatment. When I only applied data or applied water based on data, we put 1 inch of water or 45 gallons across this plot. And again, you're only applying water when it was needed based on data. Okay, so to kind of sum that up, this definitely has been a summer when we need to apply irrigation to maintain a certain standard of turf quality. Okay, you're going to overwater if you use a calendar-based approach. Okay, generally, most people apply well over 1/2 inch per cycle. Okay, so you're going to be overwatering. If you just go based on ET, more than likely, you're going to be okay. You might underwater a little bit, but it's better to underwater when it's hot outside so we avoid getting nasty diseases like summer patch on this Kentucky bluegrass. But the best way to go about it, and we're getting towards, especially for home lawns, is using in-ground soil moisture sensors that can tell you exactly when to apply by how much water from the soil. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Dr. Petrella. Some excellent insight on that project. All right, as Dave mentioned, and somewhat abnormal for me, I'm not prone to sharing screens. I want to talk a little bit about some images that popped up last week. Jens, just give me a thumbs up, make sure I did that correctly. So from the standpoint of, excuse me, some of the images that got sent in the last week, we had people, homeowners, asking questions about a dollar spot. And, you know, if you've listened to Todd over the last week or so, he will have told you that dollar spot hasn't really been a problem. If you listened over the last month, we've had kind of a quiet year with dollar spot, but we've had some other issues pop up. However, when we heard it, we kind of saw some of these images, and so this one looks like it's a park area, park district. So they're going to mow based on the schedule, and they're not going to do anything else because of the fact that they're required to manage this in that manner. Also another one looking like this. And what we're looking at, folks, and we'll have a real clear delineation in the next couple of pictures, is the fact that we're getting tire marks. Now you have some blotching or patches out on the right and left hand side of these tire marks, but this is tire marks. And as I tell our students, if it is a straight line, it is not going to be biological, i.e. that is caused by human activity. Now, here's the problem. The homeowner indicated he was told that this was dollar spot, and that is not dollar spot. Now, we understand that people have seasonal workers and people who are trying to get a job done, and it's revenue generation. But when there is no irrigation on the lawn and conditions are hot and dry, and turf is extremely stressed, this may have been actually caused by not just a mower, but somebody trying to apply possibly insecticide, right? They're looking at grub control at this time of year. In this instance, you're losing on two fronts. One, you've left a mark on the turf that's going to take a long time to recover. If it stays hot and dry, it may not recover. Two, if you put insecticide out where there's obviously no irrigation and the turf is stressed, you're not going to get any value out of the insecticide. Insecticide also needs moisture to get down into the plant and be useful, right? It's the same as Dr. Gardner mentioned. So in that instance, you're going to have problems with grubs later in the year. And so that effort at revenue generation on that one day now becomes revenue loss, because the homeowner is going to call and say, I don't want you near my lawn again, because one, you left big yellow marks on it, and two, I got grub problems despite the insecticide application. So in two instances, you're losing here. If you need or have to generate revenue in this instance, I would consider applying something like very low rates of iron and doing it with a lawn gun and not anything else, because that is about the only thing that's going to give you any value when turf is stressed like this. And I mean very low rates of iron, because everything else you're doing is not going to help. So from that standpoint, we would ask and urge caution when it's hot and dry. The less you do at that time of year, the more you're going to do from the standpoint of retaining your customer. So that's my rant over. Other things coming are popping up. We've seen some brown patch show up on high cut turf up at our research plots in Worcester. We do have a little bit of dollar spot on our research green in Worcester, but kind of we're trying to push towards that from the standpoint of moisture and fertility activity. The problems as far as moisture in Cleveland and in the northern part of Ohio, we've not seen quite the same rainfall. So in general, conditions are on the drier side. And most of the golf course superintendents are probably in a happier situation because of that, because they feel that they get more control on their problems when it's drier and hotter. But I would say we're seeing some pretty record or close to record ET rates based on air movement, high skies, and temperatures. So managing irrigation is going to be critical. Again, when you've got 2 inch high turf, it's a little bit easier versus that 1/10 of an inch. And so sometimes doing less is going to be better. Upcoming activities, we're getting ready for the OTF Field Day and the OLCA Field Day. They're going to be the 2nd and 3rd of August. So get involved in registration there. Scholarship outings for OTF, October 3rd, I'm pretty sure. And then October 19th for the ATI scholarship outing. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out. We did miss one question last week. Hopefully we answered that today with the video. And best of luck for the next week, folks. Hopefully conditions come back in our favor.